Okay, welcome guys. So for our second video, we're going to take a look at sociological perspectives as part of Unit 10 Health and Social Care Level 3, and we're going to be looking at the conflict theories today. So the first thing, following on from our previous video, thinking about what is the difference between a conflict and a consensus theory. Now the answer to this is that unlike a consensus theory, such as functionalism, where as a society we're in general agreement and harmony and we coexist, and there's a shared sense of purpose, within a conflict theory, it emphasises that there is a growth in inequality between two social groups. That could be the rich and poor, it could be men and women, it could be ethnic minorities, ethnic majorities. So essentially there's two social groups who have a tension or a conflict between them. Now in Marxism, the key source of that conflict comes down to social class, and they talk about this concept of capitalism, and to emphasise that capitalism is bad according to Marxist perspectives. Capitalism is based on the private ownership of a business, and in Marxism there are two social classes. You've got the ruling classes, the bosses, who own companies, who own factories, and they're known as the bourgeoisie. You also have the working class, who would be what we call the proletariat, and they work for the bourgeoisie. Now, within this system, the bosses have the power, they have the money, and they have the wealth, and that's because they own the factories and the companies that make the goods. The workers own nothing, they have nothing. All they have is their ability to sell their labour, sell their time to make money. And the problem and the conflict that arises partially comes from the bosses want to maximise the profit. They want to give the lowest wages they can. For them, it's about making the profit, making money. And the conflict comes from the workers. The workers want more money. So that's where there is a disagreement. Now, this big difference in wealth means that the workers are exploited. That leads to a conflict. But the workers don't do anything about it. Because under what Marxists argue is that under a capitalist system, there are these powerful ideological or sense of fault patterns in place, and the working class are effectively brainwashed by the ruling class to think that the inequality in society is fair. And this isn't just healthcare that does this. This is an idea that's recreated through education, through family. All the institutions are kind of promoting this idea. And ultimately what it leads to is that this ruling class ideology that inequality is fair, is natural, is normal. Going back to Victorian era, the big notion of survival of the fittest was a big contributor of this idea that the best and brightest are the ones who survive, and they're often the rich, not taking into consideration the opportunities and resources they have available to help their success. So just as a quick example of Marxism and capitalism in action, we're going to think about iPhones, and you can think about the most recent iPhone or whatever version you want. But the new iPhone at the time of producing this, the iPhone X costs £999 to buy. Now that phone, that iPhone X, with the materials that cost to make it, to build an iPhone X, it costs about £370 in material, and the manufacturing costs are £5.58. So to build that phone, you're looking at about £376 roughly to build an iPhone X. So that extra money, where does it go? That extra £623, who takes that? Now that doesn't go to the workers. The average worker in China, because obviously if you look on the back of your iPhone, you'll see it's made or assembled in China. The average working fee for workers in China range from about 38p to £2.28, depending on their level of skill and their sort of involvement on the production line. And that's per hour. They're paid that 38p an hour. Now the average monthly pay for workers in China is somewhere between £492 to £644 a month. So again, the idea, this notion of capitalism is that the people working on the production line, building iPhone X's day after day, hour after hour, at the end of the month, they don't even have enough money to buy the product they've made. And this comes from this part of this issue of capitalism, that the rich, the owners of Apple and the factory owners, make vast sums of money for no physical work involved in making an item. The workers who make the item don't get any of that money at all. So it's just an idea just to explain how capitalism and Marxism kind of work. So for Marxists, ultimately what we're going to see as we move on to the next bit is that they think the healthcare system is unfair. They argue that it gives an advantage to some but not to others, and they view the healthcare system as a function of helping capitalist society. So if you reflect back to function, it's a very different view of healthcare from functionalism. Now, key thinker in this theory was Karl Marx, and his key ideas and key themes that he produced was that individual behaviour is shaped by society, so we are controlled by society. That's a structural approach, very similar to functionalism. The type of society and economic production that Marxism has is called capitalism, so it centres itself around capitalism, and there are two social classes, we mentioned the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Conflict is the key element in this relationship, as we mentioned already before. So again, it's conflict between two social groups. And what Marx argued was that this conflict, this disagreement, would eventually lead to a revolution of some kind. So capitalism being removed as a system and something being brought in to replace it. And his view was that it would be like a socialism or communism replacement. General weaknesses of Marxism: it can be criticised for ignoring the individual. It's a macro approach, it's structural. So it looks at the whole of society. It doesn't really look at the individual. It doesn't talk about individual choice. It overemphasises the value of social class, the interests of class, economic functions. And there are inequalities in class and money, that's undeniable. But standards of living have improved, things have changed, society has become a little bit more equal. And again, Marxism tends to ignore this. And do Marxists give too much power to the economy? Do they not recognise the other institutions which are just as influential, like family, media? Obviously, social media is very, very powerful. But again, from when a lot of these writers were sort of putting their theories together, Marx, obviously in the early 1900s, these things weren't sort of conceivable at that time. So how do we apply this to health and social care? We'll go into this a little bit more later, but we've got Navarro, who talks about how the dominant view in healthcare is the biomedical approach, so medicine and treating an illness, and it regards ill health as either random or a failure of the individual. So there's a tendency in Marxism that if you get ill, there is a notion that it's your own fault, it's victim blaming, your poor diet, your choices in life, your decision has led to ill health. It doesn't really consider issues like low pay, poverty, hazardous working conditions, pollution as causes of illness. The role of the medical professional, on the other side, is that the healthcare that is there to keep the workers fit, to keep capitalism moving, prevent workers being off for long periods of time and on sick leave, is to get them back to work as quickly as possible to keep them doing the job. It is very similar to Parson's sick role. Again, the idea that doctors decide whether you're sick or not, and they control how long you're absent, and then the focus is placed on medical treatment as opposed to prevention of illness. So again, very, very similar to functionalism views. Now, if we're going to link this to your healthcare setting, what we need to think about is what we can say. So doctors control and allocate sick role. So you go to your doctor, they will give you a sick note, very similar to functionalism. Again, the goal is to minimise disruption to capitalism. There's been a growth in healthcare, private healthcare, where you receive quicker treatment in better facilities. So again, there's that growth of private healthcare that shows the wealthy have to alternative options. Doctors do not treat everyone the same. We know that middle class patients receive longer consultations. Some with obesity related illnesses are seen less favourably. And again, there is a focus on treating illness rather than the cause of illness, so treating a condition rather than what has caused it. Now, the strengths of Marxism, free healthcare provision, is there to, we can see it as that there's a connection to health capitalism. So again, it's free healthcare provides a false class consciousness that society is fair and equal and everyone gets help. Doctors are agents of the state. They control access to medication, illness, sort of definition. And again, that doesn't really address causes of inequality. It just monitors what's happening. And someone we haven't really spoken about is Donzelot, who talks about how healthcare professionals are part of the agencies of the state, and they do monitor people's lives closely. So they do look at family life and monitor families, such as midwives and home visits to check on children. They do monitor the family and whether it's doing its job properly. Criticisms of Marxism is that it's quite crude, it's quite negative, it's quite pessimistic. It sort of has quite a negative view of doctors and medical professionals, and it ignores the contribution that they make to people's health. It also, we have become increasingly focused on preventative methods in healthcare and medical professions. We are moving towards that preventative approach rather than just treating an illness. And then just an example of capitalism in the media. So, why would capitalist society cut funding? Because, for older people, they're not making any more money, they're not contributing to society, it's a cost to look after them. So examples like the dementia tax or a petition for patients to pay for their own care takes the cost of the state, puts it on the individual, puts it on the family, and again, it kind of contributes to capitalism because a lot of these companies are privately run. So let's move on to feminism. Now, there's a very, very, very brief history of feminism. There's some good videos, good documentaries I would encourage you to go and watch. I'll put some links and some suggestions in the description below. So there's been four main waves of feminism. We had the suffragist and suffragette movement in sort of the 1800s to 1920s, campaigning for women gaining the vote. That was the first wave of feminism, and the vote was achieved. Second wave of feminism kind of came in the 60s to 80s. It was sort of following the war. Women have played a big role in society, and it was the push now for more women's equality, so more controls over the body, involvement in employment and work, and again, that was the second wave of feminism. In the 90s, we had a third wave. So this was kind of more about the girl power movement. It believed that feminism should be for everyone, and it obviously rejected universal sisterhood as excluding LGBT trans women. So instead, it promoted a greater inclusion of different social groups as part of this feminism movement. And then lastly, the fourth wave of feminism was the hashtag movement, and this is kind of where we see from 2010 to present, and it's been driven by social media and digital platforms. So it's kind of the Me Too movement was kind of a good example of this fourth wave of feminism. So when we look at the different types of feminism, there's, feminists are not homogenous, they're not one big group, there are different branches of feminism. There are three sort of groups we are going to predominantly focus on: Marxist feminists, radical feminists, and liberal feminists. So there are different versions of them, but ultimately they all agree that there is an inequality between men and women, that society and sociology has been generally dominated by men, so it's very, very male stream, and that they campaign for better treatment of women or to gain equality of women. Now, just as a very brief example of this, and again, I thought as an anecdotal example, the sort of Emma Watson, who and the actress or actor has become very prominent in sort of campaigns for gender equality, and I thought these two images would sum up what I wanted to highlight. So on the left, you've got a newspaper article. So Emma Watson gave a speech on feminism and gender equality, and trying to include, the idea that feminism is still a progress, and so we need to campaign and improve society. And this was an article from The Sun, which kind of just ripped into her and sort of undermined everything, sort of saying that, I think the line is that, whining lefty PC crap for campaigning for gender equality. And then on the right was something I found on Facebook. It was part on my Facebook feed that I found it quite interesting, that you had this Time Out London article basically criticising the Sun article on the left for undermining her speech for gender and equality and sexual assault awareness. And then I thought it was quite interesting that the related ad directly below the article was the 26 photos that prove Emma Watson is the sexiest movie star. So again, it was these kind of contradictions, and it does highlight why feminism is still important. And again, you can have a read these Google searches. You start searching these phrases on Google and it comes up with these suggestions. This highlights why feminism is still needed in society, why it's still an important issue today. Now, the Marxist feminist argument, we're going to go through these different branches of feminism generally, and then we'll kind of come back to how this all fits in with healthcare. So there are three branches we're going to focus on, and the first of these is Marxism, and it overlaps with what we've just said. So Marxist feminist is Marxism plus feminism. So they talk about how there is a social class inequality. It talks about the impact of capitalism, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. We've also got inequality between men and women, and the idea is that women are oppressed by capitalism and men. And we've got this idea of Benston, who talks about how women are this reserve army of labour, cheap labour, brought in during times of need, like the Second World War, and then dropped as soon as the men returned home or are no longer needed. And within the family, and this image kind of reflects it, there's this notion of a feminist called Ansley, who talks about how women, when they fulfil their role of housewives and mothers, are the takers of shit. And it's a concept, it's a key quote, so you can use it. And the idea, if you look at this image, you've got the workers leaving the factory, they come home, the wife calms them down, de-stresses them, does their cooking, cleaning, sends them back off to work, happy and relaxed. And he goes back to work, and this keeps capitalism moving, because if he didn't, he would get angry, the man would get angry, frustrated, and that would lead to some unrest in the workplace. In this whole process, women do all the domestic work, calm them down, but there's no one to de-stress the woman. As another sort of famous sort of art image that kind of represents this as well, you can see again a woman's work is never done. So again, there's a split role between doing paid work on the production line and then going home and doing all the housework, the cooking, the cleaning and the domestic chores. The main criticisms of Marxism and feminism, it may explain housework benefits capitalism, but again, it doesn't explain why women should be responsible for it. So house husbands could be useful to capitalism, but again, it kind of focuses on women's role. And obviously, ruling class men may benefit from more women working, so cheaper labour, contrasting to men. So again, the idea, there are some sort of flaws in the argument. Radical feminism, the gap fill here, the answer to this, so blames female exploitation with men and patriarchy. It's a more extreme version of feminism. Women are the victims of male dominance, oppression and violence. There's been a history of oppression in society, and women are socialised into being housewives and mothers. Again, the criticism of radical feminism is on the extreme end, that it's the smallest group who sort of speak the loudest, essentially, and it doesn't recognise the improvement in society, the sort of progress that's been made. It also argues that women are passive victims in all this process. It doesn't recognise that women do stand up and resist patriarchal oppression. And last but not least, the liberal feminists. Now, liberal feminism is slightly different because, again, it recognises that there's been a change. These are your happy-go-lucky feminists. So they recognise that things have improved, but things still have a way to go. And a lot of their focus is on political change and improvement. So legislation like Equal Pay Act, sex discrimination, things, and the Equality Act we've discussed a lot, that have improved the position of women over time. Things have got better, but we still have some way to go. And that's where kind of, I think most people who would say they are a feminist, who want men and women to be equal or think men and women should be equal, probably fit into this role, that things are better, but maybe still have a way to go. But criticisms would be that, despite legal changes and advances, we don't have full equality, and globally we don't have full equality. And liberal feminists are accused of ignoring diversity of class and ethnicity. And last but not least, there's a little sort of bonus extra on there is black feminism. So again, this is a bit like Marxism feminism, is class and feminism. This is sort of ethnicity and racism and feminism. So it's again argued that women have been, or feminism has been predominantly narrated by white women who don't understand the experiences of black women or ethnic minority women. And again, whilst feminism is generally critical of the family, black feminists may regard it as a positive institution providing refuge from racism. So again, it's a different avenue of feminism, highlighting that not all women have the same issue. Patriarchal oppression does seem to be a common theme, but every woman has her own different sort of set of issues to face. Now, when we link this to our setting, how this applies to healthcare. So think about the role and the needs women have of the healthcare system. Women generally will go through, or most women will go through, pregnancy and childbirth, and these stages of life have been defined as more of a medical problem, an illness to be treated with technology. So we've seen an increased number of caesareans, more scans, and Oakley, who is a prominent feminist, argued that childbirth has been taken out of women's control and placed into medical control professionals, often male professionals. And motherhood's also become under increasing surveillance. So health visitors, GPs, again, women judging other mothers. So what has been a very sort of a women-centred role has become invaded by medical professionals and judgment. In the healthcare system, there is a massive divide. About 90% of nurses are female, have lower status, lower pay than doctors, who are around 65% male. Also, contraception. All contraception is generally aimed at aimed at women. Women have to take the more invasive contraception, like the pill, coils, implants, injections. Men don't have this level of contraception, but the emphasis on a lot of women to avoid pregnancy is that they have to take responsibility for contraception. And then when we link this to our setting, so again, think about gender differences in your setting. Who are predominantly doctors? Who are mainly nurses? Why do men and women use your setting? And think about stuff like how pregnancy is managed and monitored. And then last but not least, again, just the strengths. So pregnancy and childbirth has become medicalised. There is more intervention in women's medical lives and pregnancy, but there is a greater focus on the plus side, that there's more detection and prevention of conditions like breast and cervical cancer. There's also observable differences in how men and women obviously participate in healthcare, but also in the high levels of health professionals. So there is a growing number of women entering health professionals as GPs, so we could link that to liberal feminism and March of Progress. Criticisms, again, medical technology is beneficial to birth, so there is less deaths during pregnancy and births. The infant mortality rate and the number of babies who die before their first birthday is it's down to about 3.5 per 1,000 live births. In 1900, it was 154. So there's been a massive decline in infant mortality rate, and there has been a growth in female GPs and medical professionals in sort of the last decade. And then last but not least, just two examples of news articles reflecting feminism. So women working longer hours could be at risk of diabetes. So for liberal feminism, women working longer, but then it's the health consequence of that. And a really, really good example is this vaginal mesh implant, which was used by the NHS to treat sort of collapse, sort of bowel movement, used on a lot of women, and it's been really traumatic for the women who've had these treatments. So again, a really good one for feminists or radical feminists, and the idea that women are sort of almost being used as guinea pigs by the healthcare system. Okay, and there we have it. So that's conflict theory, very briefly reviewed.